Title: The Unspoken Request. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew each other's business, though no one was ever brave enough to speak the truth. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting its golden glow on the modest house at the edge of the village. A house that had seen generations come and go, and yet remained unchanged in its structure and in its secrets. Clara, a woman of beauty and grace, had never truly understood the weight of the phrase, family ties. To her, it meant warmth, support, the kind of unbreakable bond that tied her to her husband, Daniel, a man of unwavering loyalty and strength. But as her wedding day passed and the years went by, there lingered an unspoken tension between her and her mother-in-law, Lydia, a woman of sharp words and sharper intentions. Lydia had always had an odd way of showing affection. She would give Clara advice, sometimes unsolicited, sometimes veiled in a tone that was hard to decipher. It was clear to Clara that she had once held Daniel's heart in a way that no one else could ever truly replace. In fact, Lydia's love for her son seemed to bleed through everything she did, as if no one could measure up to the ideal she had built in her mind. But Clara, in her youthful hope and optimism, believed that over time she would earn her place in Lydia's heart. She believed that eventually her love for Daniel would be enough. But one evening, beneath the thick of moonlight, things changed. Clara sat across from Lydia at the dinner table, the faint sound of crickets filling the space between their words. She had long grown accustomed to the awkward silences, but tonight there was something different. Lydia's eyes, usually cold and calculating, seemed to soften. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to speak with you about something very important. It's not easy for me to say this, but I think you need to hear it." Clara, a bit taken aback, nodded. "Of course, Lydia. What is it?" Lydia leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've been watching you and Daniel for a while now, and I think you should know something. I can see the love he has for you, but Clara, love is complicated. Sometimes it's not enough. It can turn into something else, something not so pure. Daniel, well, he's become different since the two of you married." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She'd always known her mother-in-law had her doubts about their relationship, but this was far beyond what she'd ever expected. Lydia paused, her eyes narrowing with a strange intensity. "I want you to listen carefully, my dear. I've been through much in my life, and I've learned things that most women never do. If you want to keep Daniel close, you need to understand the fragility of a man's heart. Sometimes, a man needs a little more than what a wife can offer. I've seen it time and again, and I think you're at a crossroads." Clara sat frozen, her stomach twisting into knots. She couldn't process the words, couldn't fathom what Lydia was suggesting. She knew Lydia wasn't naive. Her wisdom ran deep. But this felt wrong, immensely wrong. What was her mother-in-law trying to say? "Lydia, I don't understand," Clara whispered. Lydia's voice grew even softer, as if sharing a secret that could never be spoken aloud. "I've seen the way Daniel looks at you. He adores you. But there's a distance now, a gap that you cannot fill. There are other ways to ensure he stays loyal to you, to us, to this family. If you were to, say, allow him to experience something outside your marriage, just to test the waters, you would have the power to control the situation. The truth is, Clara, men like Daniel, they don't always stay, not without a little nudge." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. What are you saying?" Lydia's lips curled into something that could only be described as a knowing smile. "I'm saying that if you allow him to stray, it would only reaffirm your place in his life. Men like that, They never forget the one who stays, the one who doesn't leave. You would become irreplaceable. The silence between them was suffocating. Clara could feel her world crumbling, the very foundations of her marriage and her trust in Lydia shaking. It was as if a dark veil had been lifted, revealing something that she never wanted to see. Days turned to weeks, and Clara found herself haunted by Lydia's words. She began to notice the small, seemingly innocent gestures of Daniel's, those moments when he looked out of the window lost in thought, or when he left the room without saying where he was going. Was Lydia right? Was their marriage on the brink of something she couldn't control? The whispers of her mother-in-law echoed through her mind as Clara wrestled with the thought of what Lydia had suggested. Should she confront Daniel? Title: The Unspoken Request. Part 2. Clara's heart was a battleground of emotions as she stood in front of the mirror, her reflection still a blur of uncertainty. The moonlight streamed into the room, casting long shadows across the floor, almost as though the night itself was urging her to move. The words Lydia had whispered echoed in her mind, a persistent hum, a reminder of the dark seed her mother-in-law had planted in her heart. But Clara's resolve was clear now. She would not let the darkness take root. That night, Daniel came home later than usual, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders, his eyes weary from the day's work. As he walked through the door, Clara felt the presence of something unspoken between them, a quiet tension in the air. He noticed her stillness, the way she stood by the window, the light in the room softer than usual. "Clara, you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice laced with concern. Clara turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady but filled with a gravity that made Daniel pause. He had never seen her like this before. There was something different in her gaze, a quiet strength that he didn't quite understand. "Of course," he replied, setting his bag down and walking over to where she stood. "What's on your mind?" Clara took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot lately about us, and about what's been happening between us. Between you and me, Daniel. And there's something I need to know, something I've been keeping to myself." Daniel frowned, sensing the shift in the air. "Clara, what's going on?" She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about your mother." The words fell between them like a heavy weight. Daniel's face shifted, the warmth in his expression replaced by a flicker of apprehension. "What about my mom?" he asked, his tone guarded. Clara looked down at her hands, gathering the courage to speak. "She came to me the other day, and she said something to me, something I can't forget. She told me that in order to keep you, I should let you stray. That if I let you experience something outside our marriage, you'd realize how important I am to you. She said it would make you stay with me." Daniel's eyes widened, and for a moment, he said nothing. Clara could feel the air between them thickening, his silence a thousand unspoken questions and fears. She could hear his breath quicken as he processed the words. "She said, that?" Daniel finally managed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Clara, I don't even know what to say. That's not something she should have said. Ever." Clara's heart tightened in her chest. "I don't know why she said it, Daniel. But I need you to understand something. I love you. I don't need to test our love. I don't need to do anything that goes against what we've built. And I need to know if you feel the same way. Are we in this together, or is there something I'm missing?" Daniel stepped closer to her, his face filled with regret, his hand gently reaching for hers. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I never should have let her talk to you like that." What she said, it's not right. And it's not me. I don't want that. I've never wanted that. I want you. I chose you. And I will always choose you, no matter what anyone else thinks or says. Clara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth she had so desperately needed to hear. The weight of the past few days seemed to lift, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the peace of knowing that Daniel's heart was with her. But even as they stood there, united in that moment of clarity, the shadows of Lydia's influence still loomed large. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that her mother-in-law's power over their lives wasn't finished yet. The following days unfolded in a delicate dance, one of forgiveness and rediscovery. Clara and Daniel took time to rebuild the trust that had been shaken, slowly reweaving the fabric of their marriage. They talked about the things they hadn't said before, the dreams they had buried under the weight of everyday life. And through it all, Clara knew one thing for certain. Love was not a thing to be manipulated or coerced. It was a choice, every single day. But the storm was not yet over. It was late one evening, several weeks after the confrontation, when Clara received an unexpected phone call. It was from Lydia. "Clara," Lydia's voice crackled over the line, her tone cold and distant. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Clara's pulse quickened, and she felt a tightness in her chest. "What is it, Lydia?" There was a long pause before Lydia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I made a mistake. But you must understand, Clara, I only ever wanted what was best for Daniel. I wanted him to be happy. You were always so perfect for him." Ah, revenge. The sharp edge of human emotion, where pain morphs into something darker, more dangerous. It is a force that bends the mind and heart, turning both into instruments of justice or destruction. Let us delve into this new chapter, where betrayal stirs a different response, one born not of love, but of vengeance. Title: Revenge for Betrayal. The air was thick with tension as Clara stood before the mirror, her reflection a stranger to her. Now. No longer the young woman who had stepped into the world of marriage with hopes of love and harmony. She had become someone else. A woman torn between the remnants of love and the searing weight of betrayal. She had forgiven Lydia, for what else could she do but release herself from the poison of the past? But there was a darker part of her heart, a part that still ached with the memory of the words Lydia had whispered in the quiet hours of their conversation. A part that could never forget the insinuation, the manipulation, the way her mother-in-law had tried to bend the very fabric of Clara's marriage to her will. Clara had stood strong, but the seeds of doubt planted by Lydia hadn't disappeared so easily. They had festered deep within her, and with each passing day, the bitterness of betrayal grew. Daniel had reassured her time and again that he was with her, but in the quiet moments when they lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her, something hidden behind his calm demeanor. And then, one evening, the truth finally came to the surface. Clara had returned home early from a visit to her mother's house. As she approached the front door, she noticed a shadow through the curtain, a figure that wasn't Daniel's. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Slowly, she pushed the door open, the faint sound of laughter reaching her ears. And there, in her own living room, was Daniel, laughing, his hand resting on the shoulder of a woman Clara had never seen before. The woman was beautiful, her eyes sparkling with an intimacy that cut through Clara's chest like a blade. Clara stood there for a long moment, a cruel sense of understanding dawning on her. The betrayal she had feared had finally manifested, and it was more brutal than she had ever imagined. The woman smiled warmly at Daniel as she rose to leave, but when her eyes met Clara's, the smile faltered, a flicker of recognition flashing across her face. Daniel turned, his eyes wide with surprise, then quickly filled with guilt. "Clara," he said, his voice faltering. I can explain." Clara didn't say a word. She turned on her heel, her heart pounding, and walked out of the room. She could hear Daniel calling after her, but she didn't stop. Not now. Not when she felt the very foundation of her life crumbling. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to lash out in the anger that had taken root inside her chest. But more than that, she wanted to understand. How had it come to this? How had the man she loved allowed this woman to creep into their lives and betray her trust? But beneath the fury, something else stirred. Something more dangerous. Something that had been buried for too long. A desire for justice. For retribution. She had always been the kind of person who believed in forgiveness, in letting go of the past. But now she saw the cracks in the walls she had so carefully built, and she knew there would be no peace unless she acted. Not just for herself, but for her marriage, for the sanctity of the love she had fought so hard to preserve. The idea began to take root, dark and consuming, a plan that would break him the way he had broken her. Clara knew she would not forgive him. Not yet. She could not let the betrayal slide unnoticed, untouched. If she was going to heal, she needed to make him feel the weight of the pain he had caused. She needed him to understand what it felt like, to lose trust, to lose love. The plan formed slowly, like a shadow creeping across the floor. She had always been good at playing the part of the loving wife, the patient listener, the forgiving heart. But now that mask would slip, and the woman who had always put others first would rise, hardened, determined, and bent on revenge. The next few days were a blur of silence and tension between Clara and Daniel. He pleaded for her forgiveness. His remorse painted across his face, but Clara said nothing. She allowed the silence to build, knowing it would drive him mad. He was desperate to understand, but the truth was Clara didn't want him to understand, not yet. Then, the opportunity presented itself. One evening, Daniel received an invitation to an important work event. It was a gathering of his colleagues, the kind of high-stakes affair where reputation and connections were everything. Clara knew this was her moment. Revenge for betrayal. Part 2. The room buzzed with conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of introductions. Clara stood tall, her figure a striking silhouette against the warm golden light of the ballroom. She felt the weight of every gaze on her, the curiosity, the fascination. The power she had once held quietly in her marriage was now a tangible force that could no longer be ignored. Daniel stood on the other side of the room, frozen in place as his eyes locked onto Clara's, and a sinking realization washed over him. She was no longer the woman who would patiently wait for his explanations. No, she was someone else now. Someone who had claimed her own power in a world that had once been his. She was untouchable, cold, and radiant. His heart raced. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, some whispering, some watching with a subtle smirk, others unsure of the unfolding drama. Clara had made her entrance with precision, and now all he could do was stand there, a man who had unknowingly destroyed the very thing he had sworn to protect. Clara caught sight of him through the crowd, her eyes cold, but a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She held his gaze as she moved gracefully through the room, every step calculated, every movement deliberate. Her presence was magnetic, commanding attention in a way that felt like retribution itself. As Clara reached the bar, she took a seat, her back straight, her posture regal. The bartender, a young man with a nervous smile, approached her. "What can I get for you, miss?" "A glass of champagne," Clara said, her voice smooth but with an underlying edge that was impossible to ignore. The bartender poured the drink, and as Clara took the glass from him, Her gaze swept the room again, searching for Daniel. She spotted him in the distance, attempting to blend in, his eyes never straying far from her. For a long moment, Clara did nothing but watch him, savoring the tension that hung in the air. Her heart had been broken, yes. But now that heart had hardened, and in its place was something far more dangerous. "Clara!" Daniel's voice broke through the crowd, and she turned to face him. His features were tense, his eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I didn't expect this." I'm sure you didn't," she interrupted, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You didn't expect me to become this woman, did you? The one who no longer lets you walk all over her. The one who takes control of the situation instead of waiting for a hand to be extended. Do you even know who I've become?" Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen her like this before. Confident, poised, a stranger in the skin of his wife. He wanted to apologize, to explain that it was a mistake, that the woman in the other room meant nothing to him. But the words wouldn't come. All he could do was stand there watching as Clara sipped her champagne, her gaze unwavering. "You think an apology will fix this?" Clara continued, her voice low but filled with venom. "You think saying you're sorry, looking regretful, will undo everything? Well, it won't. You've already broken me, Daniel, but I'm not here to let you fix me. I'm here to show you what it feels like to lose everything." The room felt smaller now. Clara's words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, and Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew the consequences of his actions were coming to a head, but he had no idea how much worse they would be. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking. Clara's eyes narrowed. "No, you didn't. But you did. And now you'll have to face the consequences. You wanted me to be something else, didn't you? You wanted me to be a different woman, one who would never question you, one who would always forgive. But here's the truth. I'm not that woman anymore," and stood then, slowly, deliberately. Her dress shimmered under the soft lighting, a piece of armor she had donned for this very moment. Every part of her was poised for battle, every fiber of her being prepared to execute the plan she had carefully crafted. "I've decided," Clara said, her voice firm, "that the best way to make you understand the depth of your betrayal is to take away the one thing you care about most, your reputation." Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Clara smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "You think I came here to cause a scene? To publicly humiliate you? No, I've planned something much more subtle, much more effective. I'm going to show you how easily you can lose everything." Before Daniel could respond, Clara turned and walked toward the woman who had once been the catalyst for her betrayal. The woman who had slipped into Daniel's life with ease, who had become a symbol of his disregard for Clara. Revenge for betrayal. Part 3. The weeks following that fateful night at the gala were a slow, methodical descent into a world Daniel could no longer control. The life he had built, his career, his relationships, his carefully crafted image, began to unravel like thread pulled from the hem of a garment. Clara had won. She had not only exposed his betrayal, but had made it so undeniable, so complete, that he could never repair the damage. But for Clara, the taste of victory was bittersweet. She had made Daniel suffer, yes, but the satisfaction of that wasn't enough to fill the emptiness left in the wake of his betrayal. Revenge had been sweet, but it didn't erase the hurt. And as the days stretched into weeks, Clara found herself standing at the crossroads of justice and personal healing, unsure of what path she should take next. She had given up on the idea of forgiveness. But there was something more elusive, something even harder to let go of than forgiveness. And that was the pain of having loved so deeply, only to have that love shattered by the man who had once promised to stand by her. Clara's days were spent in silence, She had moved out of their shared home, leaving behind memories of laughter and late-night conversations. She had taken only what she needed, leaving the rest to be swept away by the passage of time. But even as she severed ties, the weight of the past lingered, a constant reminder that betrayal wasn't just an act. It was a wound that refused to heal. Daniel, meanwhile, had become a man undone. He had lost his standing at work as rumors about his personal life began to surface. His colleagues, once eager to align with him, now whispered behind closed doors, their loyalties shifting. His reputation had been reduced to rubble, and with each passing day, he sank deeper into the loneliness he had earned. He had tried to reach out to Clara, calling, texting, even writing letters, but she refused to acknowledge him. Each message he sent was met with silence, a silence that spoke louder than any words could. He couldn't understand why she had turned so cold. She had been the love of his life. How could he have been so foolish? The answer was simple. He had let his desires eclipse his loyalty. He had let someone else's affection become a weapon, and now it was his own heart that was being torn apart. It was on a late evening, as Clara sat in her apartment, nursing a glass of wine and contemplating the past, that she received a call. The number was unfamiliar, but there was something in the pit of her stomach that told her it was him. Daniel. Clara hesitated for only a moment before answering, her voice cool, detached. "What do you want?" "Clara." His voice was shaky, as if every word required immense effort. "I know you hate me. I know you can't forgive me. But please, I need to see you. I need to apologize properly. I need you to understand." Clara took a deep breath. The temptation to hear him beg, to listen to the remorse in his voice, was strong. But she had heard it all before. She had heard the apologies, the promises, the pleading. They all meant nothing now. He had already proven that actions spoke louder than words, and his actions had left scars. "I've heard enough, Daniel," Clara said, her voice unwavering. "I don't need your apologies. They won't change what happened. They won't change the fact that you betrayed me. You've already done more than enough damage." "I know I have," he replied, his voice trembling. "But Clara, please, I just need a chance to show you that I can change, that I can be the man you thought I was. I'm asking you for one more chance. Not to forgive me, but just to talk, to understand why I did what I did." Clara could hear the raw pain in his words, the brokenness that had once been so foreign to her. A part of her felt sympathy, but another part, the one that had suffered, felt only contempt. She had given everything to him once, and now she had nothing left to give. She paused, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She didn't want to feel sorry for him. She didn't want to let him back in, not even a little bit. But there was a piece of her, buried deep inside, that wondered what he had learned from this. Could he truly change? Could his remorse be genuine? "I'll meet you," she said finally, her words cold and final. "But don't think for a second that it means anything. I don't owe you forgiveness, Daniel. Not now, not ever." They met at a small cafe on the edge of town, a neutral ground that neither of them had any attachment to. Clara arrived first, choosing a table by the window, where she could watch the world outside as she waited. She didn't need to see him. In order to feel his presence, she could already feel the weight of their past hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. When Daniel finally arrived, he looked like a shadow of the man she had once known. The cycle of betrayal. Months had passed since Clara's final conversation with Daniel. The storm of emotions had settled. The whirlwind of revenge and anguish had subsided into the quiet hum of everyday life. Clara had reclaimed her peace, rebuilt herself, and stepped into a life where she controlled her own fate. Her heart, though scarred, was beginning to heal. Or so she thought. But as time often proves, even the most diligent of healing processes can be undone in the blink of an eye, when trust once again slips into the hands of betrayal. It began innocuously enough, with a chance encounter in a bookstore, a familiar face, a fleeting glance that lingered just a moment too long. Clara wasn't the type to entertain distractions. She was focused, determined, and had built a new life free from the shadows of her past. But that day, as she wandered through the rows of books, her attention was drawn to a man in his late 30s, his dark eyes scanning a shelf in the poetry section. He seemed familiar. The moment their gazes met, Clara's breath caught. It was James, her old colleague from the design firm where she had worked before her marriage to Daniel. He had been a quiet, unobtrusive man, one who had always seemed more absorbed in his work than in anything else. But there was something different in the way he looked at her now. Something deeper. Clara smiled, offering a polite greeting, but something in her stomach churned. She couldn't place it at first, the sudden unease. Was it the familiarity of his presence, or the way he had looked at her? Or was it something darker, a spark she had long buried in the crevices of her memory? "Clara," James said, his voice smooth with a note of warmth that felt both comforting and unsettling. "I didn't expect to see you here. How have you been?" "It's been a while." The conversation flowed easily. The casual chat about life, work, and the mundane details of the world felt almost too natural. He asked about her new projects, her life post-divorce, and she found herself answering with an ease she hadn't expected. They agreed to meet for coffee the following week, both unaware of the series of events that would begin to unfold in the weeks to come. As they continued meeting, something shifted within Clara. She had always been cautious, guarded, after everything that had happened with Daniel. But with James, there was a connection she couldn't ignore. Their conversations became longer, more intimate, and before she realized it, Clara was sharing parts of herself she had once locked away. She wasn't expecting this. She wasn't seeking it. But slowly, imperceptibly, she found herself drawn into the warmth of his attention. James, for his part, was patient. He never pushed too hard, never overstepped, but the moments they shared lingered in her mind long after they parted. He made her feel seen, listened to in a way that no one had in years. There was no judgment, no expectations, just a presence that quietly filled the emptiness Daniel had left behind. One evening, after a particularly long conversation about life and loss, they found themselves alone in James's apartment. The city outside was muffled by the heavy rain tapping on the windows, the warmth of the room contrasting sharply with the cold night. It was supposed to be another casual meeting, just drinks and conversation. But Clara could feel the shift in the air, the tension that had been building between them. The line between innocence and something more blurred, the way it always does, in the quiet moments when neither party dares to speak their desires aloud. And then, in a move that surprised her more than it surprised him, Clara leaned in. It wasn't a forceful action, nor was it impulsive. It was quiet, hesitant, yet undeniable. James responded almost immediately, and before she could stop herself, Clara was kissing him, her hands grasping his shirt as her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Guilt, desire, longing. Her body betrayed her heart, and she allowed herself to surrender to the moment, feeling something stir that she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the act of physical intimacy. It was the feeling of being desired, of being seen as something more than a symbol of someone else's hurt. It was the escape from the weight of her past. But as the kiss deepened and the world seemed to fade away, a single thought flickered in the back of Clara's mind. Was this the beginning of another betrayal? The following days were a blur of guilt, confusion, and self-recrimination. Clara had once promised herself she would never fall into the same trap again, never repeat the cycle that had destroyed her marriage. But here she was, standing on the precipice of that very thing, feeling the pull of temptation and the old wounds of her past. James had been patient, waiting for her to process the events, giving her space to reflect on what had happened between them. Revenge for betrayal. Part 4. The air was thick with anticipation as Clara sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her wine glass. The events of the past few months had unfolded like a cruel play, each act more painful than the last. Her decision to move on, to leave Daniel behind, had been both empowering and agonizing. She had given herself the gift of freedom, freedom from his lies, from his manipulation, from his infidelities. Yet there was something she couldn't shake, a gnawing feeling deep inside her that the closure she thought she had was nothing but an illusion. The truth was, she hadn't truly let go. Not yet. As if summoned by the weight of her thoughts, her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a name she had long hoped to forget. Daniel. It had been weeks since their last conversation, the one where he had come to her, broken and apologetic, seeking redemption. She had rejected him then, turning her back on the man who had shattered her heart. But now, she couldn't help the sudden rush of curiosity. What did he want? Why was he reaching out again? With a deep breath, Clara picked up the phone, her heart pounding in her chest as she read the message. I can't stop thinking about you. I made a terrible mistake. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, let me explain. Let me prove that I can be the man you once loved. Clara felt a bitter laugh bubble in her throat. The audacity. After everything he had done, after the way he had lied and betrayed her trust, he still thought he could win her back with words. For a moment, she was tempted to tell him exactly what he wanted to hear, to let him beg, to see him squirm under the weight of his guilt. She had every right to do that, didn't she? He deserved to feel what she had felt, to experience the depth of the pain he had caused. But then the anger, the sharp sting of his betrayal, flared up once more. She had already destroyed him once, left him alone and broken. That had been sweet, but it hadn't been enough. No, Clara needed more. This wasn't about redemption anymore. This was about taking back what was hers, control, power, and the satisfaction of knowing that she could bring him to his knees not because of love, but because she was capable of causing him the same kind of pain he had caused her. Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sat back in her chair, letting the weight of her decisions settle into her bones. She thought of all the ways she could make him regret ever crossing her. She had a plan now, a way to make sure that Daniel understood what it meant to truly lose everything. It had been a month since their last exchange. Clara had spent the time rebuilding her life, but in the back of her mind, she had never stopped thinking about how to exact her revenge. Her mind was sharp, calculating, and she had all the tools she needed to make him suffer in a way he would never forget. The first step was simple. She needed to remind him of the love they had once shared. She needed to make him believe that there was a chance for them again, even if only for a brief moment. That would make the second step more devastating. It was late evening when Clara texted him back. The message was brief, controlled, yet laced with just enough warmth to entice him. I'll meet you tomorrow. We can talk. But it has to be at my place. Daniel's response was immediate. Thank you, Clara. I promise you won't regret this. Clara smiled to herself. He had no idea what was coming. The following evening, Daniel arrived at her apartment, his nervous energy palpable. He was dressed in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, trying to present himself as the man he thought she needed to see. Clara opened the door with a smile, her expression calm, composed. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside to allow him to enter. She noticed the way he looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. It was almost pathetic. They sat down on the couch, facing each other. Clara didn't waste any time. "Daniel," she said, her voice gentle yet cold, "I've thought about what you said, and I think I understand now why you made the choices." "You did?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with relief. "Clara, She held up her hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to forgive you, Daniel," she said firmly. "I'm here to show you something." Daniel froze, his smile faltering. "What do you mean?" Clara's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I've learned something over the past few months," she said, her voice low, almost hypnotic. "I've learned that you're not the only one who can make choices. I've learned that I can make you feel everything you made me feel. And I'm going to do just that." Daniel's expression shifted from hope to confusion, and then to fear. "Clara, I don't understand." Clara stood up, moving toward the door. Over the following days, Clara's life returned to its quiet rhythm. She went about her usual routine, meeting friends, working, reading. She had everything she needed to feel fulfilled, except for one thing, a lingering thought, a question, that now echoed inside her mind like a broken record. Was revenge truly the victory she thought it would be? Or was it just another form of self-destruction, a cycle that never really ended? Her mind kept replaying the confrontation. The way Daniel had pleaded for forgiveness, how he had begged for her to believe that he could change, that he could undo the damage he had caused. She had been unyielding in her rejection, but beneath the satisfaction of his defeat, there was a strange, gnawing sense of doubt. Did she want him to beg? Did she want him to hurt as much as she had? Or was it something else? It was a thought that refused to leave her alone. Clara's phone buzzed again, and she looked at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. "Clara, I hope you're well. I need to talk to you." The message was simple, but it sent a chill through her. Her gut twisted with recognition. She knew who this was, the last person she ever thought would reach out to her again. James. She hadn't seen him since their night together, the night she had betrayed her own resolve, the night that had set her on this path of darkness. She had pushed him away afterward, terrified of the emotional whirlpool he represented. She had kept her distance, rationalizing that it had been a moment of weakness, a mistake she couldn't afford to repeat. But now, here he was, reaching out in the wake of Daniel's destruction. Was he asking for forgiveness too? Or was this something more? Clara stared at the message, fingers hovering over the screen. For a brief moment, she considered ignoring it. After all, she was done with emotional entanglements. She was done with men who sought to undermine her. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. With a resigned sigh, she typed back, "What do you want, James?" A response came almost immediately. "I think you know what I want." Clara frowned. What did that mean? They agreed to meet at a cafe, a neutral place where they could talk without the weight of her apartment or the shadows of their past hanging over them. Clara arrived early, her thoughts racing. She had been so certain about what she wanted, so sure that vengeance was the key to her freedom. But as she sat at the table, her eyes scanning the cafe, the uncertainty crept back, in like a quiet whisper. A few minutes later, James walked in, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was dressed casually, his usual air of quiet confidence replaced with something softer, almost hesitant. As his eyes found hers, Clara could see the tension in his posture, the same uncertainty that she felt gnawing at her. "Clara," he said, his voice low and tentative, "I know this is unexpected, but I had to see you. I had to understand why things ended the way they did." Clara didn't respond immediately, studying his face. James had always been a quiet, introspective man, someone who had never pushed her for more than she was willing to give. She had let herself believe that he was the kind of man who understood boundaries, who wouldn't demand anything from her. But now, in this moment, he looked different. His eyes were full of something deeper, something that made her question the boundaries she had set for herself. "You're here now," Clara said, her voice betraying nothing. "So, what do you want to say, James?" He hesitated, taking a deep breath as if weighing his words. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I think I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "not just for what happened between us, but for what I've been avoiding. I've been running from this, from you, from what we had." Clara felt a flicker of something in her chest, something that could almost have been affection, or perhaps guilt. She had told herself that she was over him, that their brief time together was a mistake she didn't need to dwell on. But hearing him speak with such rawness, such vulnerability, brought back memories she had tried so hard to bury. "I don't want to hurt you again, Clara," James continued, "but I can't pretend anymore. What we had, it wasn't just a fling. I thought about you every day after we stopped talking, and I think I made a mistake when I walked away. I was afraid of what it meant, afraid of falling into the same patterns of hurt and betrayal I've known in my own life." Clara swallowed, her mind reeling with the implications of his words. What was he saying? Did he want more? Was he offering her another chance? "James," Clara began, but her voice faltered. "You don't understand. What happened between us? It wasn't real. It was a moment of weakness, nothing more. I've moved on." James smiled faintly, but there was a sadness behind his eyes. "I don't believe that, Clara." Revenge for Betrayal, Part 6. The weeks passed, each day feeling heavier than the last. Clara had made a choice, or so she thought, to embrace the aftermath of her revenge, to live with the consequences of her actions, and to move forward. Yet, the weight of what she had done still clung to her like a second skin, and with every step she took, she couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. The remnants of Daniel's defeat had tasted sweet at first, but now with each new day that sweetness soured. She had stripped him of his pride, broken him in ways she hadn't thought possible. Yet, as she looked back on it, it felt hollow. The victory she had envisioned now seemed like an empty shell, beautiful on the surface, but devoid of substance. And James? He lingered in her thoughts too. The man who had once shared her bed and ignited something within her that she had, buried deep. The man who had challenged her beliefs, who had made her confront the very essence of her heart. He had given her the space to question everything, to question herself. And though she had rejected him in the past, his words now echoed in her mind. "You deserve peace, Clara." Had she truly sought peace, or was she still caught in a cycle of destruction? One evening, as Clara returned home from work, she noticed a familiar sight outside her apartment building, a car parked near the curb. The black sedan belonged to Daniel. Her heart clenched at the sight, a mixture of anger and curiosity rising within her. Why was he here? Had he come to beg once more, to apologize for everything, to ask for a second chance? Or was this some final act of desperation, a last-ditch effort to reclaim what he had lost? Clara stood frozen for a moment, staring at the car, her thoughts swirling. But before she could decide whether to approach him or turn away, the door to her building swung open, and there he was, Daniel. His eyes met hers immediately, and there was no mistaking the pain there, the deep, palpable regret. He was wearing the same suit he had worn the night of their confrontation, but it was disheveled now, as if he hadn't bothered to take care of himself since that fateful day. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. She wanted to feel nothing. She wanted to feel triumphant, empowered. But there he was, standing before her, his presence a stark reminder of everything that had happened. He took a step forward, his voice hoarse. "Clara, please. I need to talk to you." Her mind raced, torn between fury and something softer, something she had long since buried. She didn't want to feel sorry for him. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken again. But beneath her hardened exterior, something stirred, a flicker of the woman she once was. She crossed her arms, holding her ground. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Daniel." He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. "Please." "Just give me a moment to explain. I know I've done horrible things. I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I need you to understand, this isn't just about us. It's about me. I'm not the man I was. I want to change, Clara. I want to be the man you deserved. But I need you to believe me, to give me a chance." Clara's chest tightened, and she fought the urge to turn away. She had been strong. She had made her decision. She had already defeated him in ways she hadn't imagined possible. But was that enough? Was that truly all she needed to feel at peace? "Daniel, you don't get to rewrite history," she said, her voice steady, though the tremor in her heart was palpable. "You betrayed me. You hurt me. And no matter how many apologies you throw at me, I can't just forget that. I can't pretend that everything is fine." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just need you to see that I've changed, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Not for you, but for me. For my own soul." Clara stood there, her mind torn in two directions. She could walk away, tell him that his words meant nothing, and leave him to wallow in his guilt. She could shut the door on this chapter and move on, knowing that she had done enough, that the revenge she had so meticulously planned had been her victory. But was it? Was it truly enough? For the first time since she had exacted her revenge, Clara felt a deep sense of uncertainty. The bitterness that had once filled her heart began to recede, replaced by something else, a longing for something more, something beyond the destruction she had so carefully crafted. Was revenge truly the answer? Or had she been chasing an illusion? Daniel's eyes never left hers, his expression one of raw vulnerability. Clara could see the weight of his guilt, the depth of his remorse, and she realized that despite everything, there was still a part of her that wanted to believe in him. Maybe it was foolish. The Lies That Bind. Part 2. It had been a year since Clara and Daniel had started rebuilding their lives. Time had softened the jagged edges of their past, and slowly the walls they had built between themselves began to crumble. There were still scars, but they learned to navigate the raw, tender spots with patience. They shared quiet moments of understanding, the kind that only people who had been to hell and back together could understand. But while the surface seemed calm, the undercurrents of their relationship were anything but peaceful. Clara's lingering doubts, ones she had buried deep, continued to fester. She had promised herself she wouldn't return to the darkness, that she wouldn't slip back into the patterns of betrayal and vengeance. But the truth, as always, had a way of creeping back in, undetected, until it was too late. It started with a spark, an innocent interaction with a stranger, a glance that lingered a little too long. The tension between Clara and this new man, Leo, was palpable from the moment they met. He was different from Daniel in every way, charming, confident, his eyes full of stories yet to be told. He had an energy that stirred something deep inside her, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. For a moment, it was as if everything she had been holding back came to life. Leo made her feel seen. He made her feel desired in a way Daniel no longer did. Clara tried to brush it off, thinking it was just harmless attraction. She was married, after all. She had made a promise to Daniel, and despite the shaky ground their relationship had once stood on, she had vowed not to repeat the mistakes of her past. But one night, one fateful night, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening when Clara found herself at a gallery opening, surrounded by people she barely knew. But her eyes kept drifting back to Leo. He was there too, his presence magnetic, his smile disarming. The night was supposed to be about the art, but in reality, it became about him. And before she knew it, they were talking, laughing, as if they had known each other for years. There was no denying the chemistry between them, and Clara found herself caught up in it, her thoughts clouded by the tension that simmered beneath every word. At the end of the night, Leo walked her to her car. The evening had slipped away so easily, so naturally, that Clara barely noticed the time passing. She was aware of the distance between her and her husband growing with every passing day. But this felt different. They stood by her car for a moment, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Leo's fingers brushed against hers, and Clara's heart raced in her chest. She was scared, but she was also exhilarated. "You know," Leo said, his voice low, "we should do this again sometime. I think you're amazing, Clara." Clara swallowed, feeling the heat of his touch still lingering. It felt like something more than just a passing flirtation. She should have stopped it, should have told him to back off. But instead, she found herself nodding, the words slipping out before she could think. "Yeah, I'd like that." Leo stepped closer, his lips brushing against her cheek in a soft kiss. It was brief, but it was enough to ignite the fire she had been trying to extinguish. The rush of guilt that followed was immediate, but it was fleeting. She told herself it was just a kiss, no harm done. That night, when she returned home, Daniel was already asleep. He had no idea, of course. He hadn't noticed the distance between them, not like she had. Clara lay in bed beside him, her mind racing, guilt and desire warring within her. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. She knew that the moment she allowed herself to cross this line, there would be no going back. But despite the gnawing fear, the temptation was too strong to resist. The next week passed in a haze. Clara found herself seeking out Leo again under the guise of friendly meetings. But the truth was harder to deny with each encounter. They shared stolen moments, touching, whispering, sharing pieces of themselves that she had long forgotten how to give. Then came the night when Clara crossed the line. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't expected. But after dinner, a quiet walk, and a lingering moment in the dark, Leo kissed her, and Clara kissed him back. It was all she could think about after. That, the way he made her feel alive again. She had been numb for so long, going through the motions with Daniel, pretending that things were okay. But with Leo, everything felt real. The thrill, the excitement, the sense of being wanted, it was intoxicating. The affair began as something small, something she could compartmentalize and keep hidden. But as the days turned into weeks, the lines began to blur. Clara found herself spending more time with Leo and less with Daniel. Revenge for Betrayal. Part 7. The aftermath of Clara's decisions had left her heart in pieces, scattered in ways she had never anticipated. She had taken what she thought was justice, but the cost of it had been more than she was prepared to pay. The burning satisfaction that came from seeing Daniel brought low had faded into something else, a cold emptiness. The emptiness she had created was suffocating her, and no amount of revenge could fill the void inside her. But the desire for closure still lingered. Clara could feel it like a fire that refused to die, smoldering deep within her. She wasn't sure what it was anymore, Whether it was anger, shame, or something else entirely, but she knew she had to find some resolution. She had to know. Was she the villain of her own story, or was there a way forward? It was one of those quiet, overcast mornings when Clara's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be from Leo, or even from Daniel. But it wasn't. The message was from someone unexpected. Someone she hadn't heard from in months. James. The message was brief, direct, and charged with an urgency that made her heart skip a beat. "Clara, I need to see you. Now." There was no explanation, no context. Just that simple, urgent plea. Clara's mind spun. She hadn't spoken to James since that night, the night she had made her decision to step away from everything he represented. Her heart had broken in a way that had forced her to close that door, even though she still wondered what might have been. But why now? After everything? Why would he be reaching out? Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let the past lie where it was buried. She had already destroyed her life once with decisions rooted in revenge and anger. But something within her, some raw curiosity or need for answers, urged her to act. She responded, her fingers trembling as she typed, "Where?" He replied almost immediately, "The park, near the fountain, 3 p.m. When the clock struck 3, Clara found herself standing in the same park where she and James had shared so many moments, the quiet, stolen hours where they had spoken of dreams and fears, before everything fell apart. The fountain still trickled. In the background, its gentle sound a stark contrast to the heavy silence that hung between them. Clara spotted him sitting on the stone bench by the fountain, looking exactly as she remembered. His broad shoulders, his dark hair just a little, longer than it used to be, his eyes still holding that same intensity, that same fire. But there was something different about him now, something weary in his posture, as though the weight of whatever he had come to say had been heavy on him for a long time. She approached cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. James looked. Up as she neared, his gaze filled with an emotion she couldn't place. "Clara," he said, standing up slowly. His voice was rough, and there was something raw in the way he said her name, like a man who had been haunted by a memory for too long. "James," she responded, her voice quiet but steady. There was so much she wanted to ask him. So much she wanted to know, but she couldn't find the words. He motioned to the bench, offering her a seat. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down, the space between them charged with unspoken history. "I've been thinking about you," James began, his eyes studying her carefully. "About everything that happened. I never meant to hurt you, Clara. I thought I was doing what was right, what was fair. But now, I realize I was wrong." Clara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what he was saying. Was he apologizing, regretful, or was this just another piece of the puzzle she had already tried to solve? "Why now, James?" Clara asked, her voice tight. "Why after all this time? Why are you here?" He exhaled sharply as though struggling to find the right words. "Because I need to make something clear. I know what you did, Clara. I know about Daniel, about your revenge, and I know how much it cost you." His voice softened, but his eyes remained intense. "You've been carrying that weight for too long." Clara stiffened, her chest tightening. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she had kept buried inside, how much she had allowed her actions to define her. She had been so consumed with punishing Daniel, with restoring her sense of control, that she hadn't noticed the damage she was doing to herself. James continued, his words slow, deliberate. "I came here because I wanted to ask you something. Not for me, but for you." Clara looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Revenge," James said, his voice quiet now. It might feel good in the moment. It might feel like justice. But it doesn't bring peace, Clara. It only leaves more scars. I can see that in you. I can see it in your eyes. The weight of it is still with you. And until you let it go, you'll never be free. Revenge for Betrayal. Part 8. Clara stood in the dimly lit living room, the weight of James's words still heavy on her mind. The park meeting had done something to her that she hadn't anticipated, something deeper than just the realization of her mistakes. It had cracked open a door she had thought was sealed shut, the door to a part of herself that still believed in redemption, in second chances. She had been so consumed with vengeance, so focused on righting the wrongs that had been done to her, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. The thing she was searching for wasn't outside of her, but within herself. But as she stared out the window, watching the night slowly swallow the world outside, another truth crept in. It wasn't over. Daniel. The man she had wronged. The man who had wronged her. The man who had once been the center of her world. There was still so much that needed to be said, so much left unresolved. And now, as Clara stood on the precipice of something that could either heal or destroy everything, she couldn't ignore the one question that lingered in the back of her mind. Could Daniel ever forgive her? The weeks that followed were filled with a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, and self-reflection. Clara went through the motions, trying to keep up appearances, but nothing felt the same. It was like she was living in a shadow of the life she had once known. She had tried to reach out to Daniel several times, but each attempt was met with cold distance, an icy wall he had erected between them. There were no harsh words, no explosive arguments, just silence, the kind of silence that felt like a death sentence. Then, one evening, after weeks of avoiding the inevitable, Clara found herself standing at his door. Her heart raced as she reached out to knock, but her hand froze just before it made contact with the wood. She hadn't thought it through. What was she expecting? A miracle? A reunion? Or was she just looking for closure? The door creaked open, and there he stood. Daniel. The man who had once been her everything. Now a stranger. A man she no longer recognized. His face was softer than she remembered, but the emptiness in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He had been hurt, and no amount of apologies could undo the damage. "What are you doing here, Clara?" His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of pain in his words. He hadn't been expecting her, and the fact that she was standing there after everything seemed almost surreal to him. I need to talk to you," Clara said, her voice trembling despite herself. "I need to explain." Daniel didn't speak for a long time. He simply stood there, staring at her as if weighing the decision of whether to let her in. The space between them was thick with history, thick with betrayal. But Clara didn't look away. She needed to say the words. She needed to finally speak the truth, even if it cost her everything. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. I hurt you, and I didn't realize just how deep it went. I was so consumed with pain, with revenge, that I couldn't see the damage I was doing to both of us. I don't expect you to forgive me. I had to say it." The words felt like they were tearing through her chest as they left her lips. She wasn't asking for redemption, and she wasn't asking for sympathy. She was simply acknowledging the wreckage she had caused. Daniel's gaze softened, but there was no immediate forgiveness in his eyes. He stepped aside, silently inviting her into the apartment. She hesitated but stepped through the door. They sat in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between them. The air was heavy with unspoken words, with all the things they had never said to each other. Clara didn't know how to start. What did you say when the person you loved had every right to hate you? What could she say to fix the broken pieces of their relationship? I know this doesn't make sense, Clara said, her voice almost a whisper. I need you to understand that I was lost, and I thought the only way to find my way back was through revenge. But I was wrong. I should have come to you instead of pushing you away. I'm sorry. Daniel looked down at his hands, his fingers clenched tightly. You were right, you know. We both hurt each other. I hurt you and you hurt me. But what happened between us? It's not something we can just undo. It's not something that goes away because we apologize. Clara nodded, her heart heavy in her chest. I know it's not that easy. I don't expect it to be. I need you to know that I understand, that I see what I've done, and I'm willing to face it, even if you can't forgive me. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that only comes when people are facing truths they don't want to confront. Then Daniel spoke, his voice quieter now, almost like a confession. I don't know if I can forgive you, Clara.